Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. This is Scott K. I hope you enjoyed my little diorama of a flower made of various switches. So why did I make a little flower? Because today we're going to be looking at a brand new tactile switch from Durock called the Sunflower T1. The Sunflower T1 is an update and derivative to the existing T1 switch, and is a hyper tactile switch with a very light switch-like tactility. This is considered a tactile version of the Durock POM piano switch that I have reviewed earlier on this channel. The switch housing is made of POM, which makes it unique versus the standard T1, which is made of polycarbonate. Now let's take a look at the breakdown of the switch. First, you have the gray housings made of a POM blend, similar to the Durock POM Piano Linear. Then you have a yellow long pole stem made of a mystery blend. In my opinion, this stem is not the same UHMWPE stem found in the linear Durock POM Piano. Finally, you have a 67 gold-plated Durock spring. So I mentioned earlier that the Sunflower T1 is a derivative to the standard T1. Here's a look at the T1 stem versus the Sunflower T1 stem. Right off the bat, you can see that the Sunflower T1 stem is longer, which contributes to a very different sound profile. In addition, if you do a side profile comparison of the two stems, you can easily tell how much beefier the tactile bump is on the Sunflower T1. This aggressive bump really makes the Sunflower feel that much more tactile than the standard T1 and provides a very sharp tactile response that starts way on top and feels like a light switch. For the sound test, we'll be using a D65 gasket mount keyboard with a brass plate and some Aqua Neon PBT keycaps. For the mic, I'm using a Shure MV7 in USB mode, and yes, you guys kept telling me to upgrade my mic, so I did, so I hope you enjoy. Here is a quick sound test of the stock Sunflower T1. After using these Durock sunflowers for a while, there was one other very similar hyper-tactile switch that came to mind, the Boba U4T. It almost felt like Durock designed the sunflower with the U4T in mind. Overall design and material between the two are different, resulting in a different sound, but the tactility of the two are very similar. I did a non-scientific demo to show what I mean by a very sharp top tactile bump. I took the sunflower and put it against other tactiles of varying designs. I made sure to use the same 62-gram long spring for them all to be equal. Here's a sunflower against the Aqua CS. Aqua CS is not as aggressive, which results in its inability to defeat the sunflower's sharp tactile bump. Now next up is the Lilac T1, which is a recolor of the standard T1. The Lilac T1 is also considered a fairly tactile switch, but against the sunflower, it's also no match. As you press them together, you realize that the sunflower will depress the lilac way before. Next up is the venerable Glorious Panda. The Glorious Panda is also a very tactile switch, but the bump design on this, along with the Holy Panda brother, are very round. This results in a less sharp tactile bump that takes longer to complete. Finally, the Boba U4T. These two guys have very similar tactile responses. With the exact same springs, it appears that the sunflower may be slightly sharper and tougher to actuate. However, after multiple trials, they do take turns, which made me believe they're about equal to each other in terms of that sharp top tactility. So now, you probably want to hear how all these switches sound. So let's go through some switch mashing. Stock sunflower. Lubed sunflower. Lubed Lilac T1s. Lubed Glorious Panda. Lubed Boba U4T. Since I felt the tactile feel of the Sunflower and Boba U4T were similar, I also want to show how different they sound. One is scratchy deep, the other is clacky smooth. Here is a very non-scientific way to look at stem wobble. First up is the Lilac T1s in the east and the west. Overall, this is a very tight switch, similar to other JWKs. Then is the Glorious Panda. You do definitely see some east and west wobble here. Next up is the Boba U4T, also very similar to the Glorious Pandas with some substantial east and west wobble. Finally, the Durock Sunflower. Like the Lilac, it's a very tight housing. Now we're going to take a look at the north and south stem wobble. First up is the Lilac. Once again, pretty good tolerance here. Next is the Glorious. Much better north and south versus the east and the west. Next is the Boba U4T. There's definitely a little bit of the north and the south, but it's an improvement over the east and the west. And finally, the Durock Sunflower. Very tight tolerances here, almost no wobble north and south. Stem wobble is not everything, but if you do use SA caps, you do want to eliminate it as much as possible. Now back by popular demand, here's my switch performance comparisons table once again. Once again, this is actually my opinion, so it's very subjective, so please take everything with a grain of salt. So I'm going to take a look at multiple different variables for these switches. First is going to be the stem wobble from loose to tight. Next is smoothness from scratchy to buttery, sound from quiet to clacky, and the pitch of the sound from deep to high. So the first one is going to be stem wobble from loose to tight. So if you take a look at the overall switches here, the Durock Sunflower is actually the tightest. I think it was pretty evident, followed by the JWK T1, in this situation the Lilac T1s. The Glorious Pandas with the little panda head on the stem and the Boba U4Ts are definitely not as good as the JWKs, but they're okay, they're not too bad. Next up is the smoothness of the switch. Out of these four switches, the Durock Sunflower was by far the smoothest. I think the POM housing with whatever their mystery blend stem is, it works pretty well. Now, not far behind is the Lilac T1. The Glorious Panda is overall a fairly smooth switch when lubed, so no surprises here. Finally, the Boba U4T. It's somewhat of a scratchy and chalky feeling switch that I feel could improve. Next up is the sound. This is looking at the overall loudness of the switch from clacky to quiet. I think most people know that the Glorious Panda switches are fairly loud switches. The Durock Sunflower and Boba U4Ts are right up there as well. The Lilac T1s are by no means a quiet switch, but compared to the three loud ones, it's somewhat middle of the chart. Now for the pitch. Out of these four switches, the Lilac T1s register at the highest end of the spectrum, being fairly high pitched. The Durock Sunflower and the Glorious Pandas are somewhat more of a middle of the pack. Finally, I think most people know the Boba U4Ts as a thocky and fairly deep-pitched tactile switch, and it definitely shows here as well. Now, this being a tactile switch comparison, let's take a look at its tactile characteristics. We'll be looking at the amount of tactility, the type of tactility, the bump location, and finally the cost. When you look at the sheer amount of tactility, I believe the Durock Sunflower and the Boba U4Ts are at the top of the chain. The Glorious Pandas follow pretty close, but with a very different kind of tactility that we'll talk about next. The Lilac T1s are also a very tactile switch, but compared to these others, there is no contest. As discussed before, we're going to take a look at the type of tactility from round to sharp. The Boba U4T and the Durock Sunflower features a very sharp tactile response that really accentuates the tactility of these switches. It almost feels like a light switch. The Lilac T1s also have a sharp tactile response, but compared to the other two, it does fall behind. The Glorious Panda obviously are a very round bump design, so the overall feel of this particular switch is very different from the other two. Now for the easy one. It's safe to say that the tactile bump location for all 4 of these switches start immediately from the top. Out of the 4, the only one where there's a tiny bit of travel before the bump is the Lilac T1, but even that is almost negligible. Finally, the cost. None of these switches are cheap switches by any means, but some are definitely more expensive than the others. For example, at the time of this review, the Durock Sunflower is the most costly at around 70 cents a switch. The Glorious Panda is not far off, being about 69 cents a switch. The Boba U4T comes in around 60 cents a switch, and the Lilac T1s at around 55 cents a switch, if you could actually find these in stock at Canon Keys. I hope this chart helps you, and now that we talked about all the different comparisons, let's wrap this up with a sound test of the Sunflower's Lubed. So, what did you think? In my opinion, if you're looking for a very tactile switch with a similar feel as the Boba U4T, but a whole lot smoother, the Sunflower is the switch for you. If you're looking for a very tactile switch with a deeper sound characteristic, but smoothness is not that important, then just look at the Boba U4T instead. I feel that the Durock's approach of using palm housings and this mystery blend stem has really been working out for them, with both the Sunflower and the Durock POM piano delivering great smoothness and nice clack of the palm housings that we were only able to get from creams before. As usual, if you liked the video, please like and subscribe, and I'll have more content for you in the future. Thanks.